Assalamu alaikum. My dear friends, do you see this flock of sheep standing right here? Every single one of them deeply love their owner so much. But then, one day, someone or some unknown individuals brutally murdered their owner. Ainda owner was alone. There was no evidence, but the sheep themselves took it upon themselves to investigate and avenge their owner's murder. But how exactly will they manage to catch the killer, and how will they even inform the public about this murderer? This is going to be an incredibly intense crime thriller, so I urge you to watch it until the very end. Today's story is about a shepherd named George Hardy and the sheep on his farm. He doesn't live in a luxurious house, but rather spends his days inside a covered van standing right there on the farm. George had such a deep affection for his sheep that he personally gave a unique name to every single one. However, the one who stands out as truly special among them all is Sebastian. He is, without a doubt, the largest and most powerful ram within this entire flock. His temperament is absolutely that of a vagabond. Sometimes when the spirit moves him, he travels to some distant place, only to then quietly make his way back home. Following this, we are introduced to Lily, who, as it turns out, is the smartest sheep on this entire farm. George was writing a letter at this very moment. In it, he was conveying all these details to someone. He continued to write, explaining how he consistently feeds his sheep right on schedule every single day, ensures their happiness and well-being, and administers medicine to each one of them individually. And do you know the most interesting thing? Whenever evening descends, George would read aloud to his flock of sheep a variety of detective tales, thrilling novels, and intricate murder mysteries. George simply enjoyed the pretense that his sheep were listening to every word with rapt attention. But he would often think to himself, "Oh, they're just animals. What could they possibly comprehend from these elaborate stories?" However, the absolute truth was quite the opposite. Because these sheep not only listen to his story, but they understand every single word of it very well. When George reads a storybook aloud, these sheep begin to gossip amongst themselves, constantly wondering who the killer in the book could possibly be. Every single sheep has their own unique and quite distinct theories about the culprit. However, our super smart Lily, she had already figured out who the true murderer was a full 2 chapters before anyone else even had a clue. He was actually quite a remarkable and truly genius sheep. So anyway, the very next day when George finally finished telling that captivating story, Lily's initial prediction proved to be absolutely and completely true. And on this particular farm, there are also 3 very small, incredibly energetic and lively little lambs. Now, normally most of the sheep's adorable babies are typically born during the beautiful springtime. However, quite surprisingly, there is also one unique lamb here that was actually born right in the middle of winter. This poor creature didn't even have a name of his own. The other sheep never truly considered him a part of their group. So George pays a little more attention to it. Seeing George show more affection to this lamb, the other sheep would whisper among themselves that George himself wasn't a sheep, so he couldn't truly understand that winter lamb. George's farm was located near a small town called Denbrook. In this town, another shepherd named Caleb also lived. And a butcher by the name of Ham also resided in that place, whose primary duty was to carve up all of these sheep. There's also a hotel owner named Beth, and the local church had a priest named Reverend Hillcourt, whose relationship with George was quite peculiar and rather convoluted. So here was a twist. The sheep on this farm could actually forget anything they wanted whenever they pleased, but everyone possessed this ability except for Maple, and this Maple was a sheep, the kind who could never forget a single thing. She was quite old and possessed a great deal of experience, so the other sheep gave her a stern warning saying, "Listen, Maple, don't you ever dare remind us of this again, not a second time." It's better not to dwell on unpleasant memories. And then, as soon as they counted 1, 2, 3, all the sheep completely wiped the entire memory of Caleb's arrival from their minds. So all of his sheep firmly believed that sheep never truly perish or die. They simply transform and become fluffy clouds. No one really knows if this particular belief is the absolute truth or merely a lie. Only Maple, however, knows that all these tales are nothing but completely fabricated stories. But even then, to keep the children happy, he goes along with this story. On the other hand, we see Father Hillcourt seated in the church, locking all that money inside the safe, and at the same time, Butcher Ham is sharpening his knife, and right here, Beth reads George's stolen letter and goes absolutely mad with rage. Just at that moment, amidst the raging storm, Elliot's car violently collided with a tree. He then began to tow his damaged vehicle away from the scene, and it was precisely then that a peculiar bright flash of light suddenly appeared before his very eyes. Later, in the dead of night, a forceful knock echoed at George's door. And the very next morning, when the sheep woke up and stepped outside, they were absolutely stunned, their eyes nearly popping out of their heads, because George was lying there completely unconscious right on the ground in front of them. Lily feels that George, just like he always does, is probably playing some fun game with them today. But when Maple goes to check George's heartbeat, she's utterly stunned and frozen in disbelief. The reason is George has passed away. Lily absolutely refuses to believe or accept this devastating fact. She insists there's truly no such thing as dying. These are just things that only exist within storybooks. Then she asks if George will now transform into a cloud. Maple, with a heavy heart, says, "No, Lily, only sheep can become clouds, humans cannot." The rest of the flock is immediately informed of this terrible news, and now, without George, they all feel like orphans. Lily says, "There's only one way to escape this deep sorrow. We must forget George." Maple then tries to stop them, but the sheep don't listen to her at all. And counting up to 3, they begin to forget all of George's memories. And just then Sebastian suddenly appears there. And he shouts out loudly, declaring that he will not allow them to forget their shepherd so easily. He says that George was their friend, and a true friend can never ever be forgotten. George once helped him get justice, and today the time has come to deliver justice to George. Sebastian reveals a bitter truth to the sheep, that George raised them not just because he loved them, but for their valuable wool. Now these innocent sheep don't even realize that they can be used for other purposes besides just their wool. Just then, a tiny lamb steps forward and asks a question that completely shatters everyone's understanding. He asks, "Why was George murdered?" Because in all those stories told at night, when someone meets their end in such a manner, it is always, without exception, a murder. This very question plants a deep and unsettling seed of thought within Lily's mind as well. Before long, the local police force arrives at the scene, and the very first person who discovered George's lifeless body was Caleb. Butcher Ham also makes his appearance there, and with a strange look in his eyes, begins counting George's sheep. Meanwhile, Lily's sharp detective instincts began to stir, and there was one particular detail she simply couldn't reconcile: why George had gone out in such heavy rain without his hat and raincoat. At that very moment, his eyes fell inside the covered van. On the table, there were 2 glasses of drinks. It was absolutely clear that on the night of the murder, someone had come to meet George. Akento, Ekwame, Ekeye, and the 2 of them had been drinking together. At that very moment, reporter Elliot arrives on the scene and immediately starts to take photographs of George's body. However, police officer Tim sternly scolds him, explicitly telling him to keep his distance. Then, this is nothing but a very standard heart attack case. There's no significant story for you to cover here. However, Elliot then highlights a significant issue. He continues to thoroughly check inside the covered van, and here Tim, throughout his entire career, has never once handled a murder case quite like this. Now Elliot poses a very crucial question to the police officer. If George truly suffered a heart attack, then why would he have rushed out of the covered van? And what exactly are these 2 glasses of drinks doing in here? However, Officer Tim remained firm in his conviction that George Hardy hadn't been murdered. Instead, he believed it was simply a heart attack case. But Dilly immediately cried out, insisting it was a 100% murder case. Someone George knew had visited him, a pause, and had secretly mixed something into his drink, causing him to ingest it. With no signs of injury on George's body, this incident strongly pointed towards poison. And the green grass stains on the ground provided clear evidence that George and the killer had struggled before his death. Lily, quite enraged, declares that this police officer is utterly foolish and incompetent, much like those characters in bedtime stories. Due to his uselessness, it's now up to them to uncover George's killer. Upon hearing this, Sebastian bursts into laughter. He says, "Oh, come on, you're just sheep. Your intellect is simply not sharp enough to ever solve a murder mystery. Okay." He tells Lily that even though you might be the smartest sheep in the entire world, you have never actually seen the world beyond this farm. You have never once stepped outside this farm. So please, just leave this murder case entirely to the humans. However, Lily was certainly not Harmon's intended bride. She immediately put every single member of the crew to work, searching for proof. She then inquired if anyone had witnessed someone arriving at this very spot last night. Right then, the nameless winter lamb claimed that he had seen George's ghost that very night, even though the darkness prevented him from clearly seeing his face. A scent exactly like George's was unmistakably emanating from his body. Right at that very moment, the church bells in town began to ring out loudly. An urgent meeting had been called in the town concerning George's recent death. Lily then stated that since this particular meeting was specifically about George, they really ought to go, but they somehow managed to make their way into town. And at that point, Officer Tim was explaining to his subordinates that concerning the matter of poisoning George, he was not in a position to offer any comments just yet because she genuinely has no idea what exactly happened to George. So upon hearing just the single word poison from the police officer's mouth, the entire town instantly realized that George had most probably been murdered. Subsequently, after a thorough post-mortem examination of the body, it was discovered that George had been administered a poison called taxine, which is naturally derived from the red berries of a tree known as yew. And that a tree was planted right outside the church itself. Amidst all this talk and discussion, a truly wonderful car came to a stop there, and from within its interior, a truly beautiful young woman emerged. Officer Tim, upon seeing her, instantly lost his heart. And it was at that very moment that George's lawyer, Lydia, made her appearance right behind him. And this is precisely where a truly significant and unexpected revelation unfolds. It was then revealed that the beautiful young woman was none other than George's very own daughter, Rebecca Hampstead. Actually, Tim had found a number beneath George's will, and he used that to call lawyer Lydia to this place. However, Tim himself had never actually opened that will to see what was inside. Lydia has stated that the contents of the will be read aloud this very afternoon. But for that to happen, the presence of Father Hillcourt, Caleb, Beth, Ham, Rebecca, and Tim is absolutely crucial. Because everyone's name is on that wheel. So here, our ship secretly reached the place where the wheel is spun. Now inside the room, the team strictly interrogates Rebecca, asking, "Did you arrive in this city today, or were you here last night too?" Rebecca, flustered, replies, "I landed by flight yesterday evening at 7. But I have never not once been to Denbrook before today." The ship noticed that even though Rebecca's face wore a false smile, her eyes clearly showed a deep fear. Rebecca then pretended to cry, saying, "I had only come here to meet my father." Meanwhile, Maple, who was standing outside the window, spotted a carrot that had been placed on the other side. Out of sheer greed, he shoved his face right into the window to grab that carrot and got himself terribly stuck. Rebecca, who was inside the inner room, then revealed another secret, saying, "I also have a twin brother whom I have never met even to this very day. And he lives in South Africa." That's when lawyer Lydia's attention falls upon reporter Elliot, and she grabs him by the collar, throws him right out of the room, and tells him, "You have absolutely no business here. Get out of my sight." Now the story's suspense intensifies even further when the police discover a distinct green stain on a pillow inside the slaughterhouse. Lydia announces that she has also summoned George's son Peter to help with the will. She explains to everyone that George sent me his old wheel 2 months ago, but today I'm going to install a brand new wheel which Tim found from George's table. And then check exactly 3 days before his death. In that will, George had explicitly written that I have some unfinished business with every single person present in this room. And today, in this very room, among all of you sitting here, there is a fool, a bad shepherd, a spring lamb, a winter lamb, an innocent victim, and 2 murderers. As soon as these words were heard, a great commotion broke out among the people sitting inside the room. They start to argue, make see, amongst themselves, trying to figure out who the killer is and who the next victim will be. Then Lydia begins to read the remaining parts of the will. George had deeded 300 acres of land to his son, Peter, which at this very moment was leased out to Caleb. For his daughter, Rebecca, he had left another 300 acres of adjacent land on which George's very own farm was situated. This meant that from that moment on, George's covered van, his enclosed trap, and all his sheep had become Rebecca's. In his old will, George had intended to donate his accumulated savings and property to an animal welfare organization. But in this new will, he had transferred all his remaining possessions into his daughter Rebecca's name. And do you know what that property was? 3.5 sacks and a massive $30 million, which is equivalent to about 250 crore rupees. In fact, 2 years prior, George had successfully discovered a cure for a dreadful sheep disease known as ORF. And he had sold the patent of that particular medicine to a very large company for $30 million. At that very moment, Maple, who was caught in the window in her struggle to get free, knocked over the entire stack of items that were placed there. Tim then stepped outside to investigate and discover the source of this sudden, loud noise. However, Maple's vision was completely obscured by her thick fur, so she couldn't perceive anything at all, and she then directly gave Tim a forceful shove, pushing him aside and rushed straight into the inn. He vandalizes all the belongings kept inside, creating utter chaos throughout the entire room. Amidst this commotion, Tim's attention falls on Beth, who was holding George's stolen letter. Maple, during the scuffle, breaks a window pane and then leaps outside. The people give him some food to eat, then they chase him back towards the farm. Caleb, who was standing nearby, observes all of this and states that handling this sheep is certainly no job for an ordinary person. What they truly need is a very strict shepherd. Especially that large and wild ram Sebastian is absolutely impossible to control, the one George had brought back from a local fair. The sheep gather around Lily and demand, "Have you still not managed to find the killer? That's an amoko on that day ke you used to solve mysteries so quickly after hearing the night stories." Lily, with a heavy heart, says, "The real world is very different and much more complicated than the world of books, you know." Just then, the sheep's attention falls on Rebecca, who with a torch approaches Rebecca in the dark up to something. And the sheep watch all this from afar and notice that this girl's scent was exactly like George's. But its appearance doesn't match George's at all. The sheep begin to think that Rebecca must have also been born in the cold winter, which is why George kept her away from himself. Anyway, some of these foolish sheep in the flock began to scream that Rebecca was the one who committed the murder. The last book George had read to them contained a method for narrowing down the list of potential suspects. So Lily suggested that someone needed to go inside the covered van and retrieve that book so we could deliver it to Police Officer Tim. However, for the mission to steal books, they dispatched a sheep named Woolilis Coop Tais Palanishi, whose eyes were so covered with wool she couldn't see anything at all. She went inside the covered van, bumping into every single table and chair, and with great difficulty she finally managed to bring that book out. The sheep quietly leave that book at the police station's door, hoping the officer team will read it and make good use of their own intelligence. After this, Lily goes to Sebastian and asks him to explain what this carnival fair actually is. Sebastian, after sharing his truly sad and heartfelt story, explained that they play incredibly loud music there, and they also have these really enormous swings. When I was just a little one, children would come every single day to pet me there and bring me food. But when I grew older, the owner of the fairgrounds changed, and that night they took me into a ring, leaving me to fight a ferocious hunting dog. They wanted the fight to continue until I was completely drenched in my own blood. But then, one night, George arrived there like a true messiah. That night, he paid the butchers a lot of money, saved my life, and took me to his farm. Lily then asks, "How did you end up in that hell? Why weren't you with your family?" Sebastian then reveals a deep secret, saying, "I was also born in winter. That means I'm a winter lamb myself." And sooner or later, every winter relocator lamb must leave its home and escape because no one considers them their own. Anyway, the next day as Tim looked out the police station window, he was surprised. These sheep were standing right in a line outside his window. Tim says whenever a new twist emerges in this case, these sheep just appear out of nowhere and latch on. But Elliot feels that Tim has completely lost his mind. That's when Tim shows Elliot all the progress he's made. He had created a massive chart of all the evidence right there on the wall. He says, "With the help of this chart, I will now find out which of those 5 suspects had all 3, the means, the motive, and the opportunity to kill George. By means, it refers to those poisonous yew tree berries that were scattered everywhere outside the church. But the primary motive for George's murder was that 250 crore rupees, which was exclusively with Rebecca. Tim states that whoever matches these 3 specific things is the true killer. And do you know where Tim learned all of this? You figured it exactly right, from that detective book given by the sheep. So now the team springs into action and starts interrogating everyone, one by one. Butcherham says the killer must definitely be one of the people named in the will, because George was a very strict vegetarian. Why would he consume poison? Warmandi, and at that point, when Tim confronts Beth about the matter of death stolen letter, Beth tells a blatant lie. She claims, "That was entirely the post office employee's mistake. What am I supposed to know?" Then Tim asks Caleb, "What exactly were you doing at George's farm that morning?" Caleb explains, stating that George had actually cancelled the lease on his land. "That's why I went to try and convince George, hoping to discuss the proposal a second time." Caleb, becoming quite angry, tells Tim, "You have read the will, haven't you? According to George, I am the bad shepherd he spoke of." Following this, Tim approaches Father Hillcourt and questions him about the veracity of the money George had given. Hillcourt is about to reveal a huge secret right here. He discloses that many years ago, George possessed absolutely no money. Therefore, the church had given his children away for adoption. But once George became a wealthy man, he began frantically searching for his own children. However, due to the strict rules in place, the church was absolutely unable to provide him with the children's whereabouts. So, Hillcourt told George, if you donate a substantial amount of money for the church's repairs, then I will discreetly give you your children's address. Hillcourt then clarified that the bad shepherd mentioned in the will was not him, but rather Caleb. At this point, the team's entire suspicion converged on Rebecca, and they questioned her. Where exactly were you on the night of the murder between 8 and 11 o'clock? Rebecca replied, I was watching TV at a hotel near the airport. That's when the team made a big move and called her by her real name, Chastity Grams. The entire room fell into a complete silence. Rebecca had actually changed her name. Tim revealed that he had uncovered all of this information by conducting a background check on Rebecca. Furthermore, Rebecca maintained a connection with a very prominent criminal, and the two of them had jointly established a bank account. Rebecca, amidst her tears, stated that this particular incident was 3 years old. I had no idea that man was the museum thief. Tim then asked, did you ever go near that poisonous yew tree by the church? Rebecca immediately denied it outright. Meanwhile, at the farm, Lily was lost in deep suspicion. The other sheep nudged her, asking, hey, what's got you so deep in thought? It's quite clear that Rebecca was the one who killed George, but just at that very moment, that little winter lamb appears there and says, no, Rebecca, my sister is a very kind person. Yeah, from her body, there's a distinct smell, exactly like George's. As soon as Lily heard Winter Lamb utter these words, a completely new idea suddenly sparked and formed in her mind. She then vividly remembered that only yesterday, Cloud had made the exact same statement. He had spotted Rebecca from quite a significant distance, and a very specific scent, just like George's, was emanating from her. Lily begins to ponder how any sheep could possibly detect a human's scent from such a significant distance, unless of course that individual had already been present on the farm. This clearly implies that Cloud is intentionally keeping some vital information hidden from them. So regardless, when Lily eventually confronts Cloud and manages to frighten him, he nervously pulls out and displays Rebecca's shimmering bracelet, an accessory she held in very high regard. This was because the bracelet itself possessed no discernible beginning or end. Cloud says that Rebecca on the night of the murder had secretly come to the farm, and as she affectionately stroked Cloud's back, her bracelet must have fallen right there. Now even Lily is convinced that Rebecca might indeed be the one who committed the murder. She told a blatant lie to the police, claiming that she had never once set foot on the farm. Yet on the very night of the murder, she was here, and she came again just yesterday. But Sebastian stepped in, blocking their path. He angrily exclaimed, you all are hating Rebecca just because she happened to be born in the winter season. Sebastian, looking deep into her eyes, felt absolutely certain that she had not committed any murder. Sebastian, furiously stomping his feet in rage, then stormed away from that very place. As this time she so clearly decides to offer her assistance to police officer Tim. Maple quietly snatches Tim's police hat and then quickly makes her escape. Tim begins to run after her, absolutely frantic, almost like a madman. And as he continues to run, he directly arrives at the very bracelet that had been left lying in the field. Tim immediately picks up the bracelet, goes to Rebecca and tells her, this bracelet perfectly matches the one on your other hand. And I found this in George's field, the very place you always claimed you had never ever visited. Soon after, the team received a warrant granting them permission to search Rebecca's room. And as the police meticulously searched and ransacked her room, they ultimately discovered those poisonous red berries from the yew tree hidden inside Rebecca's shoe. The team immediately placed handcuffs on Rebecca, and at the police station, when the team subjected her to intense questioning, Rebecca finally broke down, declaring, yes, I am ready to reveal all the truth. She confessed that on the day of the murder, she had indeed gone to George's farm. She explained that George had written her a deeply emotional letter, revealing he had been searching for his daughter for the past 20 years. George sent her his old will, along with his money and property, and asked her to come and meet him. When Rebecca came to meet George, they thought that they talked a lot about these sheep. George proudly informs her that he has given a name to every single one of his sheep, and he wishes Rebecca would take on the responsibility for this farm and all the sheep after he's gone. Rebecca tearfully says that ever since she first met George, when I saying that she had gone back. But when she learned that George had been murdered, she became terribly frightened. It occurred to her that if she were to reveal the truth, she would directly fall into the killer's trap. So out of sheer terror, she spoke a lie. But Officer Tim doesn't believe anything she says. He decides that the next morning, Rebecca will be brought to court and charged with murder. So then the next day, Attorney Lydia comes to Tim and with a wicked smile says that it seems George chose the wrong lamb for his fortune. He reveals that George's son Peter has agreed to sell all his sheep and his land to Caleb because legally, once Rebecca is imprisoned, all of her estate and property will then belong to Peter. Lydia states that by tomorrow morning, all the necessary papers will be signed. Meanwhile, Lily, who was standing just outside the window, overhears every single word. She becomes absolutely still and completely calm, and then she just stares at Rebecca, who is imprisoned in the jail. In that case, Rebecca will be released from prison, she'll inherit this farm, and my whole flock of sheep will be safe forever. Lily becomes extremely worried and says, "But George, I'm just a simple sheep. How can I possibly find the killer?" And right at that very moment, a sudden realization struck Lily's mind like lightning. She vividly recalled that on George's lifeless hand, there was a distinct green stain from grass. And just like that, as soon as this came to her mind, the entire mystery became absolutely crystal clear to Lily. Lily shouts that it wasn't a grass stain at all. Now, to help Lily on this mission, that little winter lamb also arrives, the one who never forgot a single thing. Lily then devises a master plan. She dips one of the winter lamb's legs into a vibrant blue color, and then the other leg she carefully paints a bright yellow. Later, under the deep cover of night, that small winter lamb quietly and stealthily creeps inside the police station. Rebecca, a prisoner in her cell, watches all of this unfold, astonished and quite concerned. Lily, standing outside the window, was gently guiding the little winter lamb, and that small lamb, with its paint-covered little feet, began to draw strange, peculiar lines across the police station floor. The very next morning, when Officer Tim awoke from his sleep, he was utterly astonished to discover the lines drawn across the floor. Rebecca then explained to him that this entire elaborate prank had been orchestrated by that mischievous little lamb who, responding to a subtle signal from another sheep patiently waiting outside, had come inside and meticulously created all these markings. Tim watches everything very carefully and closely. There were two lines drawn on the floor, clearly linked to George's name. One of these lines was clearly heading towards Rebecca. The other line had a dark green color, which was stuck right in the very middle of the yellow. Tim couldn't understand anything at all. Annoyed, the moment he tried to wipe off the paint with his own hand, the yellow and blue colors magically blended together, and Tim's entire hand also turned completely green. Just then, the police from the Count Court arrived, who had come specifically to take Rebecca to jail. With a heavy, tired heart, Tim reluctantly handed Rebecca over to them and started to sign the papers. But the moment Tim picked up the pen to sign, his gaze fell upon the feet of that small winter lamb standing outside, which were completely smeared with yellow and blue paint. And yes, right then, an idea suddenly sparked in Tim's mind. He understood the entire chronology. He shouted, stopping the police, and said, "Wait, release Rebecca. She didn't commit murder. Shaki and they tanti." Tim had finally come to understand the true identity of George Hardy's killer. So friends, let's now move on to the climax. Who was it that ultimately murdered George? Nietzsche Aneketesis. Rebecca, from the moment she arrived in this town, was considered the police's #1 suspect. This was because she had falsely claimed that she had never once visited George's farm, and the actual killer cleverly exploited this very specific detail to their advantage. And the true perpetrator was in fact no one else but George's very own son, Peter. Actually, George had sent a copy of his will to Rebecca, so it was quite clear that he had also sent a copy to his own son Peter. The moment Peter discovered this enormous sum of 250 crore rupees, which is $30 million, a strong sense of greed immediately took hold of his mind. And he concocted a master plan to remove George from the picture. However, Peter was extremely cunning. He was well aware that if the individual named in the will committed the murder, the police would inevitably apprehend them as the primary suspect. So he devised an elaborate scheme to pin the responsibility for this murder squarely on his own sister, Rebecca. Because if Rebecca were to be imprisoned for the murder case, she would certainly have faced the death penalty. And according to legal statutes, all that immense property, valued at 250 crore rupees, would automatically be transferred to the next rightful heir, Peter. And the crucial twist here is that just like Rebecca, Peter had also completely changed his identity. It was none other than that rotten journalist Elliot Matthew, whom, in the dark of night, that little winter lamb had mistaken for George's ghost. Because Peter's physique was exactly like his father George's, Elliot had been hiding in this country for a long time, disguised as a journalist. And George had casually mentioned to him that Rebecca was coming to see him. Elliot couldn't have asked for a better opportunity than that, so he used the cultural festival as an excuse to come to this city. That then, to make the entire world believe he's truly gone, he stages a dramatic departure from the city. But then after orchestrating his own car accident, he secretly makes his way back. And on the night of the murder, when Rebecca met George and left, Elliot secretly entered the covert van. He drank with George, George then tricked him, adding the toxic substance to his drink, and he left the new will on the table. But George was actually very tough. Before the poison's effects could fully take hold, George and Elliot got into a violent fight. And amidst this struggle, George Aitia riding rushed out of the covered van, fell to the ground, and died. Elliot was actually quite cunning because when Lyria was reading the will, he, feigning a phone call, left the room. And in that opportune moment, he stealthily entered Rebecca's room and hid those poisonous U3 fruits under her shoe. So that all suspicion would fall squarely on Rebecca. But as the old saying goes, no matter how cunning a killer may be, they always leave some crucial piece of evidence behind. And Elliot himself ended up making a very significant mistake. That was, George had two distinct colors on his hands. One was blue and the other was green. The blue color was from the sheep's medicine, the very one George Rose would prepare, and it would always cling to his hands. And the green color you see was created by mixing blue and yellow together. So do you recall that distinct green stain discovered on the pillow at the inn? It was Elliot's own pillow. Actually, during the scuffle, George had frantically grabbed Elliot's hair like a madman. Before Elliot arrived in this town, he had hastily applied a very poor quality yellow hair dye to his own hair so that his appearance wouldn't match Rebecca's or George's at all, and no one would be able to recognize him. When the blue medicine stuck to George's hand and Elliot's awful yellow hair color rubbed against each other, a green color was created on George's hand, and that very same color had also transferred onto Elliot's pillow while she was sleeping. Elliot finds herself in a terrible predicament here, but she screams, "All this is utter nonsense. Just because my hair isn't natural blonde, does that automatically make me a murderer? Sake, I don't..." "What kind of proof do you possess?" Tim offers a faint smirk and then pulls a single strand of hair from Elliot's head. Elliot, scared, asks, "What will you prove with hair?" Tim replies, "I'm not checking if your hair is real or fake. Instead, I'm going to DNA test this hair, which will prove that you are George Hardy's true son, Peter." Hearing this, the ground completely gives way beneath Elliot's feet. He runs like crazy towards his car and tries to start it to escape. But just then Lily screamed, "We've got him now. Who's going to Batosh? I couldn't pushi a chopade tushi." And right then, the two large twin sheep from that flock who had been so eager to ram Karsh, they charged with all their might and rammed Elliot's car with their horns so forcefully that the car's parts completely flew apart. And Elliot was completely defeated right there. The police grabbed Elliot by the collar and threw him into jail. And Officer Tim, with folded hands, apologized to Rebecca, and that little winter lamb also came up to Rebecca, letting her lovingly pat its back. As Tim was leaving, he looked at our detective sheep Lily with a grateful gaze, as if to say, "Thank you, boss. My career was saved today, all thanks to you." Poi mapre. They managed to successfully capture a murderer. Following this, the police then departed from the area. However, this tiny winter lamb stayed right there with Rebecca. Rebecca at this very moment makes a truly important decision. She permanently changed her name from Rebecca Hampstead to Rebecca Hardy. He bought all those helpless black sheep from Caleb's farm, setting them free and bringing them to George's farm. Rebecca was now completely following in her father's footsteps. Every evening she would gather Lily, the sheep named after her mother, and the rest of the flock around her. She'd affectionately read them various detective stories. At the end of the story, Lily would slowly get up and goes to that little unnamed winter lamb and very lovingly gives it the name George. He brings him right into the middle of the flock, and all the other sheep accept him forever as a permanent part of their family. And just like that, this peculiar and thrilling detective story about the sheep concludes right here. So my dear friends, how did you like this sensational and thrilling mystery tale of the detective sheep? Have you ever truly imagined that even a sheep could solve such a complex murder? So, what did you think of the mastermind intelligence of this sheep named Lily? Please make sure to let us know in the comments below. Well, the story ended up being quite long today, so for today, I'll be taking my leave right here.